Did you ever wonder how your mind works? Do we have control of what is going on there? Why certain things just pop into your head? Or why sometimes you feel angry without any particular reason? The answer to all of these questions has been troubling the human mind for thousands of years. As even our ancestors knew that in order to live a happy and meaningful life, you must first familiarize yourself with what you're working with. Today I'll try to unravel a mind system model that comes from an ancient school of Buddhism by using some modern ideas and my personal experience. If you're new to the channel, I'm Modern Monk, and here I try to explore and promote ways to have more mindfulness in our daily lives. A skill that will help you stay in the present moment and enjoy it more, which is the key to living a happier life, because the present moment is all we really have. Before we begin, I'd like to make a small disclaimer. Keep in mind that the model I'm talking about is just a guideline. Don't try to think of it as true or false. However, after spending many hours meditating and observing my mind, I found it to be more accurate than I could have imagined. The mind is very complex, so any description of how it works will also have to be somewhat complex. However, by understanding how it works, at least on an intellectual level, you will greatly enrich your life. You don't want to be a prisoner of your own mind. Our everyday conscious experience of the world, the thoughts and sensations appear to flow seamlessly from one moment to the next. However, the mind model suggests that if we observed closely enough, we would find that experience is actually divided into individual moments of consciousness. These moments occur one at a time, similarly to how a motion picture film is divided into separate frames. Since the frames pass so quickly and are so numerous, the motion on the film seems fluid. In the same fashion, these moments of consciousness are so brief and numerous that they create an illusion of uninterrupted stream of consciousness. According to this model, we can only be conscious of information coming from one sense organ at a time. For example, a moment of visual consciousness has to end before you have a thought about what you've just seen. And it is only because these different moments replace each other so quickly that seeing or hearing seems to happen at the same time. The idea of distinct moments of consciousness arising and passing away in a sequence is not just some nice theory someone thought up. It is based on actual meditation experience of advanced practitioners from a broad range of traditions. So if the contents of one moment are gone before the next one arises, how do we put everything together to know what's going on? The content of separate moments gets briefly stored in so-called working memory, where the moments are combined and integrated with each other. The result is then projected into consciousness as a so-called binding moment. For example, consider watching a movie. Notice how your mind automatically attributes certain voices to characters in the film, even though the sound is coming from the speakers. The sound may even be coming from behind you. We usually think of the mind as a single entity, but in reality it consists of many interconnected processes. There are two main parts to talk about: the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind is the part of your psyche you experience directly. In other words, as the name suggests, things you are conscious of, like this video in front of you right now. And the unconscious mind is a sort of behind-the-scenes agent, and we can really know what's going on there by inferring certain experiences, like dreams for example. Let's have a closer look at the conscious mind. The mind and consciousness is often thought as the same thing. However, as the mind system model recognizes, the conscious mind is only one small part. A lot smaller than the unconscious mind actually. Think of consciousness or the conscious mind as a screen. Projected onto it are certain events. I'll call them moments of consciousness. These moments come from 6 categories of sensory experience: visual, what we see; auditory, what we hear; olfactory, what we smell; gustatory, what we taste; somatosensory, that can occur anywhere in the body relating to sensations such as pressure, pain, warmth, and many others; and mental, such as thoughts and emotions. And finally, there's these binding moments that can combine any of these together. So what you consciously experience is not the source of its contents. It's more like a space into which unconscious minds projects their information. We often think we engage in some long trains of thought intentionally, yet if you had practiced meditation, you'd know that they can be spontaneous and impulsive as well. Let's have a look at what the mind system model says about the unconscious mind. It suggests it's divided into 2 parts: the sensory mind and the discriminating mind. The sensory mind processes information from the 5 physical senses. It generates moments of sight, sound, smell, and so on. And in contrast, the discriminating mind, also called the thinking or emotional mind, produces moments of consciousness with mental objects, such as thoughts and emotions. It's the part where reasoning and analysis occur. These two minds are each composed of even more individual subminds that function simultaneously and independently, like major divisions in a big corporation, each with many departments serving a specific purpose. Each submind independently performs its own specific task. For example, consider an external sound that your auditory system picks up from your surroundings. The auditory mind takes that raw information, processes it into a very raw mental representation for the sound. The initial result may be something like loud, sharp noise. Then the auditory mind will give it a more descriptive label like hand clap, for example. Furthermore, it will categorize it and evaluate it as, say, unexpected but not threatening. This all happens unconsciously before you have the experience of hearing a sound of a hand clap. Interestingly enough, most sounds, sights, and smells remain at our awareness at a somewhat unconscious level, like the whirling of a fan or how the point of your nose looks like. One other interesting thing about the sensory minds is that they play a big role in automatic responses. Like when you hear a loud unexpected noise, your head will immediately turn towards that direction. In other words, an automatic response just happens, and we become conscious of the action only as it's already in motion. When the information from the sensory minds becomes part of the conscious experience, it becomes available for the discriminating mind. It then further processes this information and transforms it into even more complex mental representations. For example, the visual mind might project a collection of sensations into consciousness of a rapidly moving black and red thing, or maybe even more specific, a black and red bird flying by. The discriminating mind then takes that and creates a more elaborate representation of this simple concept by combining it with memories, previous sensations, and other stored information, and maybe even things from our imagination. The image of a black and red bird then becomes transformed into a specific conceptual object, red-winged black bird. The discriminating mind might also add its own emotional tone, such as an experience of happiness at seeing and correctly identifying such a beautiful bird. The discriminating mind also generates thoughts and ideas, and emotions such as fear, joy, and anger. Let's have a closer look at how the discriminating mind might work. Let's say someone earlier in the day called you pushy. That thought got registered in your consciousness, it sank into the discriminating mind. Throughout the day, the discriminating mind further digested that information on an unconscious level, perhaps deciding that being called pushy was unpleasant. Later that night, the discriminating mind may project a memory of the incident back into consciousness, along with a feeling of displeasure. When this displeasing memory becomes part of consciousness, the discriminating mind can process it even further and project new thoughts and emotions about the incident. Questions may arise such as, what does pushy mean? Or should I feel ashamed or angry about being called pushy? Or is it really true? Or should I try to change it? This example only covers a sense of how the discriminating mind works. However, it actually consists of many subminds just like the sensory mind. Each submind performs specialized activities and has its own function and purpose. For example, there are subminds responsible for abstract thinking, pattern recognition, emotions, verbal logic, and many others. As each submind acquires more and more information relevant to its purpose, it then further reorganizes this information into its own relevant model of reality. For example, when you were 5 years old, you might have believed in Santa Claus, but at some point you realized that Santa Claus doesn't exist. This potentially difficult insight forced specific subminds to revise their models of reality. While the sensory minds are mostly inactive during deep sleep, the discriminating mind remains continuously active. It remains active even during deep sleep, or when we're awake but not consciously thinking. There are some very interesting recent studies that show you can learn during sleep, and it very much aligns with this mind system model. In one study, a particular odor was released into the room or a tone was played while the subjects were learning. Then during their sleep, the same odor was released or the same tone was played. What they found that providing the same stimulus during learning and sleeping actually increased rates of learning and information retention significantly. I always love when ancient wisdom overlaps with new studies. The eureka moment is another good representation of the unconscious discriminating mind, like when you're trying to solve a problem really hard. You give up and go do something else, and minutes or hours later the answer just pops into your head. Dreaming itself is evidence of the discriminating mind continuously working during sleep. A submind with an active task will remain active even during dreamless sleep. This would explain why we sometimes wake up feeling anxious or with some other emotion with no particular reason. So what we experience consciously is mostly generated at our unconscious mind, and most of the things we become aware of we have little control of. So what is the purpose of the conscious mind then? Well, with all of the subminds working independently and at the same time, the potential for conflict is enormous. And what allows everything to work together is the conscious mind. Without it, the unconscious subminds could not work together to perform their many jobs. I hope this sheds some light on how the mind works. Remember that all this information can become much more relevant and alive through practicing meditation. It's one thing to understand all of this intellectually and a whole different thing to experience it. In other words, meditation will have you experience how your mind works. Like imagine reading how to play the piano or swim. It will have no meaning until you actually play the piano or actually swim. If all of that sounds interesting, you can check this video out, where I talk about how to start enjoying meditation. Or this video, my very first not so good yet very honest video about how meditation has changed my life. Thank you all so very much for watching, stay mindful, and I hope to see you in the next one.